Meghan is hardly innocent. She's down in the dirt with me, whether she likes it or not.
Meghan arrived at Buckingham expecting cold smiles, guarded whispers, and the usual silence that followed her through palace corridors. But nothing prepared her for the wall. The space where her portrait had once hung was already bare, the frame removed, the mark still visible against the polished surface. It was not a mistake, it was not a delay, it was a message, delivered before anyone dared speak. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan stopped before anyone greeted her. The reception had been described as private and controlled, a family gathering behind palace doors, rather than a public return. Yet Buckingham Palace, the monarch's London home where royal memory is displayed with meaning, had spoken. One empty space on the family wall carried more weight than a speech. Her portrait was gone, and the pale mark left behind made the removal feel fresh. Harry looked from Meghan to the wall, and the truth reached him in stages. First came confusion, then anger, then the realization that this was not housekeeping, not cleaning, not a mistake by staff. Before Meghan arrived, her image had been removed from the Buckingham Palace family wall, leaving an empty space where her place in the royal story had once been framed. Harry tightened his hand around hers, trying to steady her while failing to hide his shock. Meghan held her posture, but her face changed. The practiced calm slipped for 1 second, and humiliation took its place. She had entered expecting distance, perhaps even coldness, but not this. A portrait in that corridor was not decoration. It was permission to be remembered. Removing it before she crossed the threshold told her she had been judged before she had spoken. A senior aide stood close enough to explain, yet he said nothing. Meghan turned toward him, and he lowered his eyes. That small gesture revealed what no one dared confess. He was not surprised. He had been instructed. Harry saw it too, and his silence hardened. The empty space now felt less like absence and more like an order carried out before the meeting began. Then Charles entered the corridor. The king did not hurry, and he did not ask what had happened, because the silence around him already knew. Meghan looked from the bare wall to his unreadable face, and Harry stood beside her with anger rising under control. No apology came. No explanation softened the blow, and as Meghan faced the monarch, the question was no longer what had been removed, but who had finally decided she no longer belonged there. A palace wall is never just a wall. It is memory, rank, permission, and power arranged in gold frames. Meghan understood that instantly. Harry understood it even faster. Charles stood nearby with the heavy stillness of a man who had made peace with a painful order. William watched from a distance, careful and controlled. And behind every silent face was a wound no one wanted named aloud. Meghan kept staring at the empty space, and the meaning grew sharper with every breath. Her portrait had never been only a picture. It had represented her place inside the modern royal family, the public story once told about change, unity, and a wider future. The royal family meant the close circle of relatives tied to the crown, the symbol of the monarchy's authority and duty. For Meghan, being removed from that wall felt like being removed from that promise. Harry felt the strike land somewhere deeper. His anger was not only for Meghan. It reached toward Archie and Lilibet, whose names lived far from the palace center. If their mother's image could disappear so easily, then what would remain of their place in royal memory? Meghan turned to him and asked, "Did you know?" Harry did not answer. His wounded eyes answered first, and Meghan understood he had been blindsided too. Charles watched them absorb it, and the king did not soften. That restraint hurt more than a raised voice. He carried the weight of the moment like a man choosing duty over comfort, yet his silence told Meghan that the pain had been measured in advance. Charles knew what the removal would do to Harry. He knew what it would do to Meghan. Still, the monarch stood still, and that stillness felt final. William's presence changed the air. The prince had not wandered into the corridor by accident, and Harry knew it. The future king had clearly been briefed before Meghan arrived, which meant the decision had passed through more than one conscience. William looked careful, but not surprised. That was the revelation Harry could not ignore. This was not a loose act by palace staff. It was a family decision dressed as order. Camilla remained just beyond the main group, quiet but watchful. The queen consort, the king's wife and senior royal partner, held her expression behind a mask of calm. Meghan noticed her, and so did Harry. Camilla's silence suggested knowledge, and knowledge suggested planning. Then an aide revealed through a documented household note that the portrait had been moved to a restricted private room. Meghan went cold. The portrait had not vanished. It had been placed somewhere she was never meant to enter. The empty frame did not appear overnight. It began weeks earlier, behind closed doors, after one ceremony turned colder than anyone expected. What looked like another polished royal gathering became the point of no return. A glance was noticed. A sentence was repeated. A name was left out of a toast. And by the time the palace lights dimmed that evening, Meghan's place on the wall had already begun to disappear. Meghan had walked into the Windsor Legacy reception believing the evening was about family unity. The reception, a formal gathering used to honor royal history and present the family's future image, carried more meaning than the guests understood. It was meant to reaffirm the direct line of succession, the clear order showing who stands closest to the throne. That made every position, every greeting, and every photograph matter. Meghan knew the room watched her, and Harry felt the pressure beside her. Then the moment came. Meghan stepped forward during the family photograph before Catherine had been positioned. It lasted only seconds, but inside the palace, seconds can become evidence. Catherine stayed composed, her smile held in place, but the meaning cut deep. The princess understood that the photograph was not casual. It was designed to show continuity, with William, their children, and the king's future standing in quiet order. Meghan's move broke that order, and Catherine felt overshadowed in a room built to protect rank. Catherine did not react in public. She waited until the ceremony ended, then entered a private room and slowly removed her gloves. Her hands trembled, and William noticed. The prince asked what had happened, though he already knew. Catherine said very little, but her silence carried hurt. She had spent years carrying duty without complaint, and in one polished moment, Meghan seemed to step into a place that was not hers to claim. William found Harry afterward. The exchange was short, low, and tense. The future king told his brother that family pain could not keep becoming palace disruption. Harry stiffened at the words, and William did not pull them back. He warned him that the monarchy could survive disagreement, but it could not survive public disorder dressed as emotion. Harry left angry, but the warning had already landed. A courtier later carried a written account of the incident to Charles. The documented account described the Windsor Legacy reception as the night internal patience collapsed. Charles read it twice, then placed it beside another folder already marked for review. That review began with one question. Should Meghan's portrait still hold a place on the Buckingham family wall? First it was discussion. Then it became a draft order. Then it waited for the king's hand. Meghan learned the truth days later through a private household briefing, and her shock turned into fury. The reception had followed her into Buckingham like a shadow. The empty frame was not sudden. It was punishment with a history. And when Meghan understood that ceremony had triggered the removal, she demanded the one thing the palace feared most, to face the person who signed it. That demand led her away from the wall, away from the watching aides, and straight toward the confrontation Buckingham had tried to prevent. There are moments when royal silence becomes impossible to maintain. Meghan reached that moment in the corridor outside the private reception room. Her voice did not rise at first. That made it worse. Harry stood beside her, pale with anger. Charles faced them with the controlled sadness of a monarch who had already decided. And then Meghan asked the question no one in Buckingham wanted spoken aloud. Meghan looked directly at Charles and asked why her portrait had been removed before she was even informed. The corridor seemed to tighten around the words. Harry watched the king's face, searching for regret, but the monarch gave him only restraint. William stood close enough to hear everything, and his stillness told Harry that this conversation had been expected. The private reception room behind them, a closed gathering space used for family meetings away from cameras, suddenly felt like the least private place in Buckingham. Meghan did not step back. She told Charles the empty wall felt like a public rejection, disguised as private housekeeping. Her hurt sharpened as she spoke, because the removal had not only changed a corridor, it had changed the meaning of her arrival. Harry stepped forward then, unable to hold his anger. He accused the palace of humiliating his wife first, then expecting him to behave like silence was loyalty. Charles looked at his son, and for a moment, the king seemed older than the crown he carried. Charles answered slowly. He said the decision came after a formal internal review of symbolic royal representation inside Buckingham. The review, he explained, was a private palace process used to decide which images and objects still reflected the family's public role. Meghan heard the explanation, but she did not accept its comfort. Harry heard something colder. This had not been a careless insult. It had been studied, written down, and approved. William finally spoke, and the air changed again. The prince said the portrait wall must now reflect active trust, not unresolved conflict. He did not raise his voice, yet his words struck harder because they sounded prepared. Harry turned toward his brother, wounded by the calmness. Meghan stared at William, as if seeing the deeper shape of the decision for the first time. The future king had not merely known. He had supported it. Charles did not correct William. That silence became its own verdict. Meghan's expression hardened as the truth settled over her. This was not one person's cruelty. This was a coordinated royal decision, carried by the king, defended by the prince, and witnessed by a senior aide who said nothing because nothing more needed to be said. Harry stood beside Meghan, furious and exposed, while Buckingham held its breath around them. The confrontation ended with no apology. Charles turned toward the closed door, and William remained still, as if the worst had already passed. But Meghan knew better. Behind another door waited the deeper power behind the empty frame, and the answer there would cut even closer. The monarchy rarely moves with one hand. Behind every visible decision is a chain of signatures, silences, and carefully chosen words. Meghan had seen the wound. Now came the machinery. In a private office, Charles sat with a slim folder before him, the order already marked and reviewed. The removal of one portrait had become something larger, a test of who still held power inside the palace. Charles opened the folder before Meghan ever stepped through Buckingham's doors. The king read the final instructions slowly, though every word had already been shaped by others. A private household directive, meaning an internal palace order used to guide staff and royal spaces, gave the removal official weight. It was no longer a temporary rearrangement. It was not a frame moved for cleaning. It was a decision with a paper trail, and Charles knew that made the wound harder to deny. William had given his view before the order reached the king's hand. The prince believed the family wall could no longer carry images that suggested unity where trust had collapsed. Charles listened to that argument because William was not only a son, he was the future king, the next person expected to protect the crown when the present monarch could no longer carry it. That made his words heavy. That made his support dangerous. Charles sat alone with the file and placed his pen beside it. For several seconds, he did not sign. He thought of Harry entering the palace, proud even when wounded, defensive even when silent. He thought of Meghan seeing the empty space and understanding the message instantly. The king knew the order would cut his son deeply, yet he also knew hesitation would look like weakness inside a household already divided by years of pain. Camilla watched him after the decision was sealed. The queen consort studied Charles with quiet care, sensing the grief beneath his control, but she did not challenge him. She understood the firmness in his face. Camilla had lived long enough inside royal rooms to know when a monarch was seeking advice, and when a monarch had crossed the line into command. Charles had crossed it. He was sad, but he was not turning back. The directive carried one phrase that changed everything. Portraits representing active royal unity must be reviewed. The words sounded clean, almost harmless, but Meghan's name was hidden inside them, without being written first. The directive revealed through a documented household account that her portrait was not sent to ordinary storage. It was moved to a restricted archive room, a controlled private space where palace items are kept away from public display and limited to approved access. Harry learned that detail, and something in him cooled. His outrage did not disappear, it sharpened. A personal insult could be argued with. An official erasure demanded a different kind of answer. Meghan saw the change in him, and Charles would soon feel it too, because consequences begin the moment a door closes. The palace did not erupt. It tightened. Doors closed more softly. Aides moved faster. Conversations stopped when Harry entered the room. Meghan sat in silence, staring at the untouched tea in front of her, while the truth settled around her with brutal clarity. This was no longer about a portrait. It was about permission, memory, and whether Buckingham had decided her chapter was finished. Meghan and Harry were taken away from the reception and into a smaller private room, separated from the family before the tension could spread any further. The reception mattered because it had been arranged to look calm, controlled, and united, but the empty wall had exposed the fracture beneath it. Buckingham mattered, because every private action inside those walls could become a message to the family, even when no public statement was made. Meghan lowered herself into a chair and removed one glove. She placed it beside her cup with careful hands, but the gesture betrayed her. She was shaken. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. Harry saw it and stopped pacing for a moment, because her silence hurt him more than any argument could. Meghan had faced criticism before, but this was different. This rejection had been waiting for her inside the king's own house. Harry moved toward the window and then back again, trapped between rage and restraint. He wanted to protect Meghan, yet every instinct pushed him toward another confrontation with Charles. The king had signed the order, and Harry could not escape that fact. Palace staff were already in damage control, instructing aides not to discuss the wall, the archive room, or the signed instruction. Damage control meant the careful palace effort to limit who speaks, what is repeated, and how far a private crisis spreads. A senior aide entered softly and spoke only to Harry. Through a recorded internal briefing note, the aide revealed that the portrait had been removed the previous night. Harry's face changed. Meghan watched him absorb the timing, and then she understood it too. The palace had known she would see the empty space in person. They had not warned her. They had allowed the moment to happen inside Buckingham, surrounded by the same family that had approved it. Meghan looked down at the untouched tea, and the room seemed colder than before. The removal was no longer just official, it was deliberate. Harry turned toward the door, ready to find Charles again, but footsteps stopped him. William had arrived, controlled but tense, and the prince asked to speak with his brother alone. No aides, no spouses, no palace language. Harry stared at William, and Meghan knew the request had weight. The emotional freeze finally cracked, not with an apology, but with a private demand between brothers. That conversation would become the one moment where anger finally gave way to truth. When William and Harry entered the smaller drawing room, the palace disappeared for a moment. No aides stood nearby. No carefully prepared statements waited on the table. There were only two brothers facing the damage years had left between them. Harry arrived angry. William looked tired. And for the first time that evening, the empty portrait was not discussed as protocol, but as proof of something broken between blood. William closed the door himself, and that small act stripped the room of every shield. He had asked Harry to meet privately because the confrontation had become too public inside Buckingham's walls. A drawing room, meaning a smaller formal sitting room, used for private conversations and quiet family meetings, now held the truth no aide could soften. Harry stood across from him, breathing hard, while William watched his brother carry years of anger into the silence. Harry demanded to know why William allowed Meghan to be humiliated. His voice held at first, then cracked when he said his wife should have been warned before walking past an empty space meant to wound her. William did not deny the pain. The prince admitted he knew the removal would hurt, but he said the monarchy could not keep pretending private wounds had no public cost. Harry stared at him, because that sounded less like a brother and more like the future king speaking through grief. William then revealed, through a recorded private conversation, later preserved in a confidential family account, that Catherine had been deeply affected by the Windsor Legacy reception. Catherine, he said, had felt Meghan's step forward reopened old fears about duty, visibility, and trust. Harry heard the name and stiffened. He wanted to defend Meghan, but he also understood that Catherine's hurt had not stayed in that room. It had traveled through the family, until it reached the wall with brutal force. Harry saw the portrait differently then. It was still Meghan's humiliation, but it was also years of resentment made physical. The blank space held arguments never finished, apologies never offered, and loyalties tested until they snapped. William looked at his brother and said nothing more, because the silence had finally become honest. Harry lowered his eyes, not in surrender, but in recognition of a divide neither man could force closed that night. The door opened, and the brothers stepped back into Buckingham changed. William looked exhausted. Harry looked colder. No reconciliation had happened, but anger had become something heavier. Acceptance. Neither brother smiled, and neither pretended forgiveness had arrived. And once that private truth left the room, the world outside Buckingham began turning the empty space into a national spectacle before sunrise came. By morning, the palace could no longer contain what the wall had revealed. One missing portrait became a national symbol before breakfast. The public did not need to see the order. They understood the image. a blank space inside Buckingham spoke louder than a statement. And as the story spread across Britain, Meghan's private humiliation became a public judgment on loyalty, exile, and royal power. Meghan saw the coverage from a quiet room, and the silence around her felt sharper than any headline. Palace staff had prepared a brief response, saying the family wall had undergone a routine internal update. The family wall, a display of portraits used to show belonging, memory, and royal connection, mattered because one missing image told the public who was close and who was being pushed away. The wording failed. Harry stood behind Meghan, while broadcasters turned the empty space into a verdict. One presenter called it a symbolic royal break during a morning segment, and the phrase moved across screens with brutal speed. A private household decision, meaning an internal palace choice not meant for public debate, had become a national argument. Meghan closed the tablet without speaking. Her pain had been taken from a corridor and returned as spectacle. Harry wanted to answer. He wanted to defend Meghan, to name Charles, to challenge William, to make the palace feel the damage it had created. But he knew one public response could deepen the rupture beyond repair. Meghan understood that too, and her quiet control made Harry's fury worse. He stood beside his wife, yet he could not undo the humiliation. Then the moment hardened into history. The London Herald ran a front page showing a darkened Buckingham corridor with the headline, "The Empty Frame." The newspaper, presented through a documented media briefing inside the palace, became the image everyone remembered. Outside Buckingham, a crowd gathered near the gates. Some defended the king's decision as discipline. Others called it cruel. Charles read the front page in silence. The king knew the palace response had not calmed the nation. It had confirmed the symbolism. Camilla watched him fold the paper and place it beside the files that had started the crisis. She did not speak, but she understood the cost. The monarchy had controlled the wall, yet it could not control what people believed the empty space meant. Charles prepared one final private meeting as the noise grew louder. He was not going to reverse the order. He was going to explain what the monarchy had chosen to become. The world had made its judgment loudly, but the final verdict would come quietly, in a room where the king faced the cost of his own decision. In the end, the portrait did not return to the wall. That was the verdict. Not shouted, not celebrated, not softened. Meghan had arrived at Buckingham and found her image already gone, but by the final meeting, everyone understood the removal was bigger than one frame. It marked the moment the monarchy stopped pretending every fracture could be hidden behind gold, glass, and ceremony. Charles met Meghan and Harry one final time before they left Buckingham. The king did not offer hope that the portrait would be restored, and he did not hide behind soft words. He explained that the wall now represented active royal duty and shared institutional trust. Active royal duty meant official work carried out on behalf of the monarch, the public role that connects a family member directly to the crown's daily life. Meghan heard the explanation, but the meaning had already reached her before he spoke. Meghan listened without interrupting. Her sadness stayed controlled, but it was visible in the stillness of her face and the quiet way she held herself. The answer confirmed what the empty wall had told her from the beginning. She had not been forgotten by accident. She had been removed by choice. Harry stood beside her, no longer pacing, no longer demanding, because anger had finally met a door it could not break open. Charles admitted the decision had been painful. He said it slowly, as if every word carried weight, but he refused to call it a mistake. That refusal mattered. The king was telling them that the monarchy had chosen stability over personal repair, order over comfort, and the wall over the wound. Harry absorbed it in silence. Meghan did too. Their silence was not weakness. It was the sound of two people understanding that the palace had already made peace with their absence. William watched from the doorway as Meghan and Harry prepared to leave. The prince understood what the missing portrait had ended. It had ended the illusion that family and institution could always be reconciled. It had ended the hope that every private hurt could be covered by ceremony. He looked at Harry, and Harry looked back, but neither brother reached for words that no longer had power. Meghan left Buckingham with her dignity wounded. Harry left with his loyalty divided. Charles kept the wall intact, and William kept the future protected. But the monarchy lost something quieter and harder to restore: the comfort of pretending the family was whole. The removal of Meghan's portrait became the defining symbol of a royal separation, no longer whispered about, no longer hidden, and no longer reversible. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.